what is one of the standout situations, you could say, or memories or experiences that you had in law enforcement or tactical training that is something that you're able to share with the audience that just gives them a little bit of more insight into things that you've been through, that you've lived through, that seem, like, wow, that's impressive. That doesn't sound like a good day.
Okay, I'm actually gonna go in maybe an unexpected direction. One is just going to be a brief reminiscence that relates to training, and the other is going to be a example of don't do the things I did on this particular day when I was very much a novice, as what we might refer to as a conflict interventionist. So the first thing that pulled at me when I was a cop is I got very involved very quickly in the world of training. And when I say training, I mean the training of other people. That was a world I sort of, fell into quickly. And I found that there was something there that was pulling at me consistently. So, my cop career kind of went like this. I was this guy, I would drive a car, arrest bad guys, do all of that stuff. But at the same time, I was getting pulled in different directions, teaching different agencies, different things. And I could tell that this was probably going to be my destiny. And there was sort of a tension between the two because, I felt very drawn to be part of both of them. But as I got more involved in training, there were certain things that kind of validated what I was doing. And one of those was something I'll share now. And the reason I'm sharing it is because what we're ultimately sort of talking about is a project that we all sort of collaborated on, not too distant past. And the subject matter is serious and might lead some people to think, well, is that stuff I can even learn remotely? Can I learn that, from videos? Is this guy even going to be able to communicate things in a way that, makes sense? The information would be accessible. So when I started training cops, there was a very fixed curriculum that was approved at the state level, and that's what cops could be taught. You could not go outside of that. And that was fairly common, nationwide. Each state sort of had their own take on it, but they were remarkably consistent, from sea to shining sea. In any event, in my early training days, that curriculum had been fairly static for a period of time. And that meant that, let's say you went through the police academy, you were taught all of this stuff. And then you would have an in-service training. You would be retaught all of this stuff. Another year goes by, you're being retaught all of this stuff. And so when I was originally sort of, blessed off as an instructor, I was essentially just a curator of this particular stuff. So, I wasn't being called upon to be an innovator, or a problem solver, just a perpetuator of this particular gospel, which had already been sort of, sanctioned. So I would teach the same stuff that people had been revisiting for a period of years. But what people would tell me is that that's the first time I've understood this particular technique or that particular technique. I've never actually been able to do it on my own without forgetting one of the steps. And that led me to think that maybe I've got something as an instructor that's a little different. Now, it's not about, when you're teaching stuff that has to do with this, there's a misconception that, the only people that teach that stuff, is the baddest guy in the room. But there's a little bit of that in that people will test you. But that's not the prerequisite. If you're a good instructor, you have the ability to communicate effectively, to break things down. And I think my secret weapon as an instructor all these years is I'm not a natural. I'm not a natural at anything. I would be in classes with guys. They could see a technique demonstrated once. Okay, got it. that it was like crazy. It was like a magic trick to me. How do they do that? I was never that guy. I had to be sort of, okay, explain it to me. Now move me through the technique. Okay, now talk me through the technique while I do it. Now, once I got it, then I have it. And once I have it, I can sort of reverse engineer it from a variety of directions. So if I've got 20 people in the room, I can explain this 20 different ways and get everybody to that place. So the reason I mention that is simply there are some things that we sort of accept are reasonable to learn via video, like say a language, but moving in opposition to somebody who's moving in opposition to you, who wants a completely opposite outcome in a situation than you do, and the operational tempo of that scenario is very high and dangerous and confusing. You can learn how to deal with that stuff via video if it's being presented in the right way. And I do believe that's something that we accomplished when we put all of that material together back in Florida. So that's not really an exciting story. So here we
go.
No, I'm going to disappoint you once more, because this story is not exciting, but I think it's important to understand. When I was fresh out of the academy, I was in what's referred to as the field training program, and that's pretty standard, coast to coast. You don't just take somebody out of the academy and throw them into the mean streets. They know things in a theoretical sense. They don't really understand things in a practical context. So a field training program is typically you get paired up with a succession of experienced officers, and first, you kind of watch them do stuff, and then over time, they start to watch you. They're still there if you get brain lock and don't, things are deteriorating fast, which can happen. But their job is to basically sort of gradually switch roles with you. And in an ideal scenario, you have different sorts of cops with different sorts of approaches that work different times of the day, because each shift has its own sort of dynamic. So I had just finished the academy, and I crushed the academy to death. Set fitness records. I was the honor grad. I was in the newspaper. It all conspired to make me think I knew far more than I did. And alas, I did not. So the field training program was bearing that out like on a hourly basis. As I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Or I thought I knew what to do, but what I thought was incorrect. So I'm only a couple of weeks into this program, and I'm tossed onto the midnight shift, a very instructive setting for young Mike. And it's probably 2:15 a.m. and it's February, it's Midwest. So like, winter is actual winter. So we've got all the coats on and all of that, the gloves. And we've just been dispatched to check on a hit and run accident. Somebody had called 911 and said a guy had plowed into a street sign, backed up into a stop sign, sideswiped the street sign again, and then just left. And there would have been no question that had you been the driver, you knew you'd hit something. So you're supposed to leave, call the police, or not leave, rather call the police and say, in an accident, an officer would come out, assess the damage, and do some paperwork, and that would be that. But as so often is the case after 2 a.m., people who are in one vehicle accidents, well, they tend to not stick around because statistically they all tend to be drunk. So we reasoned, even novice me reasoned that what we need to be looking for is potentially a drunk driver in the area as we get there, to check things out. We almost get there. We're about a half a block away, and we get pulled off of that to respond to an unknown disturbance. And, we get the address, and it's apparent that the disturbance is taking place about 2 blocks from the accident. That's correlation. That's a clue that maybe these two things are related. Even I was picking up on that with my lack of experience. So we pull up to 1195 6th Avenue. Yeah, I remember the address 6 years later. I have a weird head for disparate data. Sadly, no useful information, but things like this. So I get out of the squad car. It's crazy cold, and I hear this unearthly sound. What is? It sounds like someone's howling at the moon, but maybe it's a dog. But it kind of sounds human. What is that? Well, no time. Got to run up the steps because we're going to apartment 8, which is on the 3rd floor. No problem. I've got cardio for days. I'm fresh out of the academy. Anyway, I'm about to knock on the door, but the door is standing open. And what do I see? 2 things. Female, middle-aged, bleeding from the face. Okay, clearly she's been assaulted. And I see a shirtless man. This was my first encounter with somebody shirtless. You watched Cops, you know that whoever is not wearing the shirt, that's the guy who's going to jail. Anyway, and that came true this night and many subsequent to that. So shirtless guy, his name is Corey, I find that out later, has slid open the balcony window, and he is literally howling at the moon. That was the sound I heard when I got out. He's still yelling out the window. Not words, just sounds. This guy is next level intoxicated. So in I go. My field training officer tends to the female. I'm moving towards the guy who's, obviously the aggressor. Now, it turns out this is his mom. He doesn't live there, but he had no place else to go after smashing up his car. So he broke in the door. She presumably yelled something and got punched in the face for her trouble. Now, so far, we've already satisfied the requirements for domestic assault, which is a mandatory arrest situation. But I need to sort of go through the rigmarole. I'm Officer Gillette, I'm in the police department, there's some ID, blah, blah. So I'm trying to talk to this guy as though he's a rational human. A guy who is shirtless, yelling at the moon and unable to form words, but I'm still the new guy. I'm still just, very much by the book. And he's just looking at me and responding with grunts. And it becomes apparent that there's no productive dialogue that's going to take place. So I already know he's going to jail. We'll work out the drunk driving stuff and the hit and run stuff later. So I tell him to turn around, place his hands behind his back. He's under arrest for domestic assault. And he doesn't. Well, that's not supposed to happen. This is like, I'm serving since Tuesday on my badge. I have not had a lot of experience with oppositional behavior. And he's just looking at me. And I kind of pause and it's like, okay, he's not doing what I asked. I'm going to need to move him. So I step closer, and by this time, now here's what I didn't know. Everyone knew who this guy was, and all the other officers knew that every time he has to deal with the police, A, he goes to jail, but B, after a crazy fight, he always fights. Every arrest he had was accompanied by a resisting arrest charge. And I knew the other officers wanted to see Gillette with his first experience with Corey. So there are now 3 other cops standing behind me, not to help, to watch, because this is sort of an indoctrination, if you will. Let's see how he does. So not only does Corey not turn around, place his hands behind his back as politely requested, I noticed that he has just swung at me. Now do the math. That's literally what I was thinking in my head. What is this guy thinking? There's 4 cops literally like right here. There's no way that this goes well for him. I mean, it's about to not to. But this whole time, like this fist is traveling through the air. And this is the important part of the story. I'm having a conversation with myself while watching this fist traveling towards my face. I distinctly remember this conversation 30 plus years later. Why is he doing this? What does he think is going to happen? I mean, I'm literally asking these rhetorical questions that are meaningless in the context of somebody who's trying to knock your block off. And at some point, I interrupt myself and I say, I'm going to have to do something about this. I literally said that bizarre remark So I blocked it just like I was trained, and then, took him down on his stomach, handcuffs, boom, 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 just like the rodeo. But I will never forget that ridiculous moment where I'm having this conversation all up in here instead of actually dealing with what's taking place. If he hadn't have been so drunk, if he'd been a little faster, he could have easily broken my jaw. But in his diminished capacity, I somehow was able to have this entire conversation with myself before I got clocked on the jaw. So the moral of that story is there is a time for contemplation. You need to know when it isn't that time. That was an example of it not being the right time for contemplation. That was a time for letting, instinct and training take over, which it eventually did, thankfully. But it could have gone in a whole different direction. Wow. Just because I sort of froze up on the unreality of why he was doing something so entirely illogical.
Right. And being such an inexperienced police officer, patrol officer at that point, you're just you went in there assumptively with the assumptive close. As soon as I ask this guy to do what I say, he's going to do what I say.
There were 4 of us. Why wouldn't he? Right? Because what would a rational person do? Oh, okay. Even if I wanted to fight maybe 1 or 2 of you, I don't want to fight 4. It's like, but I was not prepared for what was irrational, what sort of was, what existed outside the bounds of my own frame of reference. Now, 6 weeks later, that was a whole different version of me because, by sheer repetition, I had become fluent in the ways of illogic.